in-laws. Well, not just in-laws, but extended family. Now, as Muslims, many of us have relationships with our mother-in-law or father-in-law or our own mother or our own father. Me, myself, my dad and my stepmom actually live with me in our home. And it's a source of so much pleasure for my family and for my kids. But if we are to step back and if we are to be honest, we know that like any other relationship, this relationship with our own parents or our in-laws, especially as we have our own kids, it can sometimes be difficult to manage. And so today we are joined by Rabab Alma, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. She's worked with individuals, couples, and families for over a decade. Now, Rabab comes from so many interesting experiences, first starting her career in corporate America and then making a change to psychology, and has been able to support so many families through this journey. And so with that, I want to welcome Sister Rabab. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Rabab.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure talking with you and being here on the podcast with you.
The pleasure is all mine. Now, Rabab, I want to dive right in. So I mentioned I live with my own dad, and actually my mom passed away, so I live with my stepmom. Is it like common even today among Western Muslims to live with extended family or have strong ties with extended family?
Absolutely. Actually, the research shows that Muslims and Hindus are the highest number of communities that actually live with extended families and their parents. So yes, it's very common in the West, in the US. I see that in my practice every day. People live with their in-laws, they live with their parents in the same household. So yes, it's very common.
We're going to be talking about some of the challenges, but before we even go into some of the challenges, I want to just highlight some of the like immense value. Okay. For my kid, there's this phrase that say it takes a village to raise children. I believe that's true. And frankly, for my wife and I who are working on Noor kids the best of our capability, having that support system at home is a huge benefit. Being able to share responsibilities, so that way, whether it is cooking or whether it is cleaning or whether it is doing the lawn, having more people to spread around the work. I mean, there's so many inherent benefits. Now I'm curious, Rabab, from where you sit, what do you see as some of, I guess, the issues with either living in joint families, but also broadly with parents and in-laws?
Well, as you mentioned, there are a lot of benefits to that. Also, but we need to be mindful of the idea that usually, or at least I see a lot of in my practice, a lot of these families, the parents or the in-laws usually are the immigrant generation. And usually the parents, or actually the nuclear family, the first generation, they live with the first generation, and there are a lot of gaps here. You talk about generational gap, you talk about cultural gap. So you see sometimes parents originally coming from the Middle East or South Asian countries, for instance, and they have certain expectations and certain priorities, where people who are born and raised in the United States or the Western countries, you see they have different priorities and maybe different expectations. So this can clash even when it comes to parenting the kids. So there are a couple of issues that we need to keep in mind when we are living in this setting as an extended family setting. And there are ways to manage this. And, on the personal level between the spouses, or sometimes you seek professional help.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So what I heard you say is that, look, there is a cultural gap, because if you're, coming from Pakistan and, so for example, my dad was born and raised in Pakistan. I was born and raised here. my dad is 69 years old. He grew up in one generation. I am, about half that age, right? So I grew up in a different generation. So as a result of that, I might have different expectations and priorities than my dad. And as a result, that might lead to challenges. Is that right?
Yes.
And Rabab, just before we even get into like managing it, let's sharpen that. Like, what are some of the challenges that you often see, or what are some of the more common issues that you've observed?
So I'm going to mention just some of them. Sometimes you hear from the daughter-in-law, specifically the daughter-in-law. I mean, of course, the problems can happen to, towards the brother, the son-in-law or the daughter-in-law, but I see it more common with the daughter-in-law that's reporting that sometimes they say that the in-laws are too controlling, or maybe they are unfriendly, or maybe they are treating my spouse like a child, or maybe they are too involved in the marital life. I have a case when someone tells me that the mother-in-law will just open the door of the room on them, like in the morning or late at night, without even knocking the door. Some of them, they will say that they judge and criticize every move I do. Or sometimes maybe they are speaking in a different language that the daughter-in-law does not understand in a common area in the household. Or sometimes their friends will leave. Now everyone has cell phones, but some people still have landlines. And you will hear maybe the voicemail coming in with a totally different language without actually recognizing that maybe sometimes the daughter-in-law or the mother-in-law speak different languages. Sometimes there's a report that the mother-in-law or the parents-in-law, they're too clingy or maybe over-attached to their spouse. Sometimes you will hear there is no respect to the privacy, and maybe they are maybe too dramatic or too sensitive.
This is mashallah, like a really robust list, Sister Rabab. And as you're telling me this list, my thoughts harken back to the Pakistani dramas that my mom used to watch when I was a kid. And they would always have the situation where there was the mother-in-law and then the daughter-in-law, and it was like dun dun dun, but the reality is I think that this is real life. And I think that many of the people who are listening might find situations either completely or even partially, the judgment, I do feel that, or, the language, I do feel that. So I think that this is something that people can sincerely relate to. And I'll share, as a, I do appreciate your bringing in this concept of, the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. I am neither the mother-in-law or daughter-in-law, I'm the husband, right? And look, there's so many parties involved in the family dynamic, and each person has a different kind of role to play. I can sincerely appreciate where you're coming from. Now, so what are some of the principles that a husband and wife, say, for example, me and my wife, like what are ways that we can help mitigate these challenges or, correct these issues?
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of ways to navigate and manage. First and foremost, for us, for the spouses, to be one united front. I often see sometimes in these sessions on my practice that the couples are actually fighting and arguing about what's happening from her family or his family, and neither one of them has control over someone else's behaviors. So becoming a united front and actually calmly discussing the issue and try to come up with some unified point of view about what's going on is extremely important. Maybe talking to your spouse gently about it. It's sensitive. I mean, when it comes to talking to someone about their parents. So you see sometimes spouses become maybe defensive. No, my mom did not mean that. No, this is really common. So looking at the family, what's considered to be normal in the family, because normal also is subjective. So sometimes you see a family, they are used to do certain things and it's very normal to them, but it's not normal for other families. So for instance, to have maybe personal space is normal for some families, but for other families it's considered to be offensive. So maybe understanding the system and understanding the patterns and how it's perceived is extremely important, and knowing how to approach your spouse about it in a gentle, respectful manner, instead of like you hear sometimes people will approach it in an aggressive way, or maybe they are mad, so start cursing, not in front of their in-laws, but maybe to their spouse about their own, the family, the parents. So that can be, people might not get the best results when they do that. I think giving examples, maybe be rational about it, allowing your spouse the time so he or she kind of like sink in and come to their own autonomy, instead of feeling that they are being pressured or pushed to do what you want them to do.
I'm curious, like Sister Rabab, what role do you think boundaries play in navigating the relationship with parents and in-laws?
I think boundaries are very important in every relationship. So we actually control how much people have access to us. And I think setting boundaries from the beginning is very important, because it's difficult to change what people are used to later on in life. So if you are used to certain things and then suddenly you're going to change, then that might maybe add more trouble. So setting boundaries in terms of you control what you share, what you don't share. Maybe avoiding fighting or arguing with your spouse in front of your parents or her parents, because that sharing this or arguing or in front of others will give them the opportunity, to get involved.
Yeah. Sister Rabab, I just want to kind of add here, and I want to share too. So two of the things that I heard you say here in terms of, navigating the relationship. The first is for the husband and wife to have a united front. And when we say having united front, what that means is that the husband and wife really do need to make sure that their own marriage is something that they prioritize, and that they have the appropriate communication internally as a unit before kind of bringing it outside of that unit to in-laws or parents or anything like that. And that means being thoughtful about communication. We actually had a conversation specifically related to communication, wherein we talked about how the timing of communication matters, the way that we communicate matters, listening matters. And so, being a good kind of communicator internally. But then number two is also about creating appropriate boundaries, specifically if you're in a situation, either living with in-laws or even not living with in-laws or your own parents, to say, hey, what are the boundaries on decision-making? What are the boundaries on space? What are the boundaries on our kids? And being straightforward with respect to those. I'll share with you, Sister Rabab, alhamdulillah, one of the things that I think my wife and I had the tawfiq, or we were blessed to do before we got married, is we actually went through like pseudo premarital counseling. And when we went through this, we actually talked about a number of like scenarios. Like, what would you do in this situation? And how would you respond in this situation? We talked about a whole host of different things, like, what about if one of our parents gets ill, and we have to live with our parent, which, by the way, happened to me. My mom was diagnosed with cancer. She got ill. We took care of my mom. What would we do if one of our partners gained 25 pounds? Okay, which I am in the process of doing. No, I'm kidding. I'm not. Inshallah, I'm not, right? But like, we talked about different scenarios. One of the things that we talked about before getting married was, hey, what role do we want our own parents to play in our own decision making? And what we decided was, look, our parents are a great source of information. We will seek their counsel, whether it's buying a house or buying a car. We'll get their advice. But at the end of the day, we're going to make the decision for ourselves. And I think that was a really smart thing for us to establish at the front end. Like you mentioned, a lot of these boundaries, it's really good to create those boundaries on the front end because doing them later might be difficult. Now, in the reality, though, Sister Rabab, many of the people who might be listening might say, well, I wish I could have gone back in time and created those boundaries. And we don't really have those boundaries. You know, my in-laws are really involved with a lot of our decision making and space and these types of things. So where do they go from here? Like, do they is there a roadmap, or is there, any strategies or tools that they can think about to rectify those boundaries or that relationship?
Absolutely. I think trying to identify the most important things that you want to change. So let's just be very realistic. We will not be able to change everything we don't like, especially if it's later. It's not like you didn't start from the beginning with premarital, and I strongly recommend premarital counseling. But of course, not all of us had that opportunity. So now here we are, we have this issue. So we want to identify what are the issues that there absolutely need to, something has to be done about them, and discuss them with your spouse. So we want to pick maybe 1 to 3 items, the most important things, and see if you two agree that there is a problem and needs to be changed. If the spouses do not agree, then I would suggest that they seek professional help on a counselor. You don't want your extended family, your parents or her parents, to see or to witness that phase when you are still not really in sync on the issue that needs to be resolved. So you want to get that straight up front. So the first step is to get your spouse on the same page with you before even addressing the issue with an outsider. Sometimes it's easier for us to talk directly to our, maybe some cases, to my mother-in-law, for instance. Okay, so she is suggesting this and that. I would say, yeah, I see your point, but I like it this way. Or maybe I would discuss it with my husband. But in our culture, sometimes this answer is not accepted. So we really need to work on being on the same page, as I said, with our spouses. The second thing that I think we need to think about is, are we focused on being happy, or are we focused on being right?
What do you mean by that?
So we want to set our priorities straight. So sometimes we can ignore certain things if we choose to. Being right, if you want to be right and you want to assert that you have the correct point of view, is good, but is this going to serve the relationship? At the end of the day, those are your in-laws, and they are the grandparents of your children, and this relationship is actually permanent. Even if the spouse is actually divorced, this relationship is permanent. So I'm talking about Islamically. So do we care about the relationship, and how can we really navigate that in a way that we do not damage the relationship permanently? Of course, we're not talking about abuse. If there is physical abuse, mental abuse, this is a different scenario. People need to get out of it and seek professional help. This is not what I'm talking about here. So we never support someone to stay in a relationship where there is abuse. We're talking about issues that we talked about, like the parenting, the managing the household, the kitchen is a big issue, the privacy, and finances, for instance. Those are issues that really come up frequently. Family gathering and the drama that goes around that might be an issue. So we want to, again, prioritize the issues, see what's your goal of this conversation, and stick to it. And be with your spouse on the same page. I think sometimes in our culture as Muslims, setting boundaries can be perceived as un-Islamic.
What do you mean by that?
So sometimes people would consider saying disagreeing with a parent that might be considered as disobedience, and it's haram. So some people take it to that extent, and this is not Islamic. Islam allows us to disagree respectfully. You know, we want to be kind and respectful, but
Okay.
we yes,
I want to double click on this. I want to double click on this because I think that this is really interesting. And this is kind of like a method to how we can disagree with our parents respectfully, which by the way, my well, I shouldn't say, but I have heard the ayah of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when your parents reach old age, don't even say oof to them. I have heard that ayah of the Quran since my parents were even young in age, right? So the question is, how do we, disagree but respectfully? And so I will get there, but before we do, I want to just underline what I heard you say, Sister Rabab. Number one, and most importantly, we kind of have to prioritize what matters, or said differently, like which battles do we even want to fight? That maybe not be the right kind of like, which battle do we want to fight as if we're in war? Okay, that's probably not the right idiom to use. But truthfully, when you say, do we want to be right or do we want to be happy? What I hear is, what do I care enough about to say, no, I really am going to assert my perspective and have a robust discussion and get to a resolution about? And what do I kind of like in one ear out the other kind of a thing, where it's just like, look, it is what it is. I'm just not going to open up that can of worms, right? So it's prioritizing to say, what are the 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, the really important things that are really important to my happiness that I want to broach with my spouse, such that we're able to together work on rectifying the relationship with my parents or my in-laws, instead of saying, hey, we're going to tackle every single issue. Is that right, Rabab?
absolutely.
Okay, very good. And I really appreciate that. Now, shifting the conversation to what you're talking about, this idea of disagreeing with parents is not haram. However, there's different ways to do it, right? No, I can't believe you. No, this is never, Allahu Akbar, you're the worst. Like, I imagine that is probably disrespectful. That constitutes as saying oof. What in your mind, what is the respectful way of disagreeing, especially with parents?
So I'm gonna reference to that for with an ayah from the Quran. I will read it first in Arabic and then I will translate it in English if that's okay. So the ayah says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلوا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. So all you have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents or relatives, whether one is rich or poor. Allah is more worthy of both. So follow not inclination. Let you not be just, and if you distort your testimony or refuse to give it, then indeed Allah is ever of what you do aware. So this ayah, it talks about, and I am not a scholar in any way or shape or form, but this ayah, and I listened to Sheikh Mink in talking about this ayah, because this ayah is very important about us really understanding how to manage the relationship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us to be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never referred to the relationship with parents with obedience. He never. He always referred to the relationship with parents to do it with ihsan, means kindness. So the word obedience was only mentioned that we only obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his prophets. So when we talk about the relationship with parents, we need to be nice, respectful, and kind. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقُولُ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ, don't say off to your parents. So that means we are not going to yell at them. We don't scream. We don't raise our voice. But we can respectfully disagree and point out injustices according to this ayah. So you need to be just, even if it's against you or your parents or al-aqrabin or your family. So it's about being just. So you as a husband, for instance, and we hear this a lot in the Muslim context, in our culture, sometimes they say, oh, the mother is the most important relationship. You need to take care of your mother. Yes, you need to take care of your mother, but your mother and your wife have the same priority. Your love to your mother is the same, different than your love to towards your wife. They are different, but you need to be just. Justice is the most important thing. A mother needs to be happy when she sees her son happy with his wife. However, in some cases, or a lot of cases in our community, we see there is some kind of competition, or sometimes the mother is compensating for her lack of emotional connection with her own husband or his father. I mean, she replaces that with her relationship with her son. So I think it's important to look at the system holistically and see what's going on. And as a daughter-in-law, as a son-in-law, is she feeling insecure? Is there any way to assure her that we are here for you? We love you. My love towards my wife is not really taking my love, any of my love towards you, but it's a different kind of love. So here we need to we make a clear distinction between the love towards the mother or the one towards the wife, and just according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words in the Quran.
I really appreciate that. Now, Sister Rabab, I know that you are not necessarily a scholar of Islam. You are, a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I don't know if you know the answer to this question. I myself am also not a Islamic scholar. I am a teacher. So now this is a crazy situation, but it goes towards Islamic responsibility. And you talked about the responsibility we have towards our wife and the responsibility we have towards our mother. All right. So in the situation that our mom and our wife fall into a river and we can only save one of them, right? Which sounds crazy, right? But it's just to say, like, is there one that we have a more responsibility towards the other, or are they both really equal? Do we think about each one of them as equal in our care or concern, or is there one that we have to have more responsibility for than the other? Who do we have the first duty to?
There is no first duty. They are equal and they are different. It's like, for instance, if you have 3 children, let's say you have 3 children. Are you going to choose which one you're going to save? You sometimes we do have favorites. Let's not just deny that. We don't announce it, but sometimes we do. But are you going to really save one and put the other one, let them drown in the river? You're not going to do that. It's the same level, but there have to be just in the relationship. So now you care for your mom. You deal with her respectfully. You see what she needs. But your duty in living and your intimacy and your emotional connection and with this small family that you have. So you care for your mom and you're kind with her and you see what she needs. When it comes to the emotional needs, there are difference between your emotional connection with your mom versus your emotional connection with your wife, and you love them dearly in your heart. You cannot say that now today I love my wife, but tomorrow I'm going to love my mom. You love them both at the same time.
I really appreciate that. I think that was a really eloquent perspective, and people who are listening to the podcast, you can't see, but like when I asked the question, Sister Rabab was like, "What kind of question is that?" In a river, mom. No, I'm kidding. Anyways, when I was in graduate school, we had an ethics class, And so on the ethics class, there was always like these really random questions. It was like, imagine there was a train coming to the city and like you would have to sacrifice one person's life to save the whole city. What would you do? Anyways, so I was hearkening back to those experiences when I asked that question. Now, I want to ask you, Sister Rabab, about intention and love, because you mentioned this in the discussion about, the mother and the relationship with the son, and there could be other things at place there. One of the things that I have felt, and again, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm just sharing my experience, is I feel like each person has a jar in their heart where they have love. It's almost like a power bar. And, as time progresses, like, the love depletes. And so you have to refill that love. And if you refill that love, then everything is, working. It's kind of like the cogs in the engine are all working correctly. But if the love is not there hasn't been love in a while, well, the oil is gone then, and that's when, the machine can start falling apart. And what I have found is in my life, each of these relationships, whether it be with my father, whether it be with my mother-in-law, whether it be with my wife, whether it be with my brother, each one of these is a cog in the machine or the engine that is my life. And like each one of these people need to be loved. And if there isn't that level of love, that's when sometimes I feel like the machine can start having problems. And I wonder if there's any truth to that, if I'm onto something there, or if that's something that you see as an area to focus on in order to establish strong familial relationships.
So if I understand your question correctly, I think we are capable of loving multiple people in our lives at the same time. My father, my mother, my husband, my daughter, my uncle, my aunt, we can love them all. And of course, when it comes to relationships, we need to cater to the relationship to grow. So we don't take things for granted. Anything is not, we don't attend to, it will wither down and it will maybe die or stagnate or, So in marriages, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran that He وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. So He put this tranquility and mercy. He didn't talk about love. He said tranquility and He said mercy between spouses. But unless we are constantly adding to this balance incrementally every single day, this government talks about the act of kindness every single day, adding to this balance. So if we talk about if there is any negative encounter between a husband and wife, for instance, one negative action, you need to do 5 positive ones to offset that negative one. This is between a husband and wife. And we can take that and apply it to other relationships, maybe not at the same level, but we need to keep adding to our relationships to maintain it. So, of course, if I don't communicate, for instance, with a family member for a long time, I will not know a lot of development in their life and they will not know the same about me. So kind of like becomes like distant, remote relationship. Do we want that? Or we need more connection? If I want more connection, I need to reach out, I need to connect. And of course, as Muslims, we keep this the connection or silat al-rahim, or the connection between the family member. We don't cut ties as Muslims, but we can keep the relationship, and sometimes we need to keep boundaries. So for instance, if someone you know that in the family they are maybe toxic, so maybe I don't have to call them every day. Maybe I can text them once in a week or once a month. It depends on what kind of a relationship I have. So we don't cut the ties. We actually manage them.
We manage the relationship. And Um, Sister Rabab, I want to talk about something really important here. Before we do, I just want to sharpen the T on the last conversation. If there is a lack of love in a relationship, love can be synonymous with appreciation, or it could be synonymous with, I mean, all these different love languages, for example. But if there's a lack of love in familial relationships, whether that be between husband and wife, whether that be between dad and son, whether that be between daughter and mother-in-law, um, if there's a feeling of a lack of love, and by the way, between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, or father-in-law and daughter-in-law, that lack of love can actually create issues. Or differently, if there is a lot of love, if there is love that is given and shared, it can help almost serve as a oil to help these relationships come together. Now, again, that's sample size of one. I don't know if that's true or not, but that was just, I guess, a thought that I had.
So love can be intentional. So I want to really build a relationship with this person, and I want to look for their love language. Love languages are 5: touch, quality time, words of affirmation, gifts, acts of service. So we want to love the person according to their own love language, not according to our love language. So if I like gifts and my husband does act of service, I will not interpret his act of service as love, because this is not how I interpret love. So love is intentional. And when you talk about if there is no love, do you mean you want to intentionally have good relationship? Do you want to intentionally have love with these people? Or is it like something you think it's natural, it just comes natural in my heart?
I think that we need to, in my own experience, it's like I have to be personally mindful of it.
Yes.
Like, if I don't think about, so for example, my dad, I'll be honest, like Sister Rabab, I take my dad for granted all the time. Like, I just forget, and I just assume he's there. I assume he knows that I love him. But, at his age, and my dad's a quality time guy, if I take out some quality time to spend with him, I know that, like, by giving him that love, it helps, like, almost proactively ensure that my relationship with him is going to be strong. And similarly, one of the things that I remember coaching my dad on was, especially after I got married, I was like, well, Dad, you have to remember, like, the more that you love son on my wife, the stronger your relationship will come as well, right? So, Dad, if you can proactively, love my wife, then inshallah, my wife will also feel more proactive in loving you. And in doing so, the relationship will become stronger.
Yeah, being proactive, intentionally loving someone. Sometimes if you see a stranger in the street, for instance, and if you don't know them, and you start a conversation and you smile, you kind of create some emotional connection, even though with a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
It's being mindful of our emotions and our needs and the other person's needs. Once we establish that, then we are actually on the path of sometimes creating the love or strengthening it. Because, when you marry someone, you don't know their parents. It's an acquired love. You know what I mean? You love them because they are the parents of your wife. So you want to add to that balance. You want to add to that account. The more you are attentive, kind, respectful, they will love you, and she will look at you. Oh, so you're doing that because of they are my parents, and that will strengthen the love in her heart.
Absolutely. Now, I want to shift the conversation, Rabab, to I think the last part of the discussion, and that is, what we just talked about with this whole idea of love was saying, like, hey, look, my agency, right? So these are all things that I can do in the relationship, and that's what we've been focusing on, right? We talked about creating boundaries. We talked about getting on the same page with our spouse. We talked about, hey, maybe I can play a role in, taking love more proactively. Okay. But look, what about the situation where we feel like we've kind of done all that we can, right? Or we have, tried our love, or we've tried these things, but we realize that, gosh, like this is really unhappy for me. I'm at a point where, I want to tear out my hair because this relationship is creating so much dissatisfaction or so much aching in my heart and in my life. I'm curious when we get to that level, um, what guidance do you have in terms of next steps?
At this point, I would advise into counseling and professional help. Seeking someone, a marriage and family therapist, or someone who deals with this kind of cases, to seek their guidance, to understand what's going on, to understand the underlying issues, what are these issues stemming from, and how to manage it. I think also sometimes working on oneself, why these issues are triggering me. Why this particular thing is really creating so much chaos inside of me? Is there something I need to work on my own self, so I can shift my mindset or look at it differently? Am I too invested, less invested? Is there something that I am missing about the relationship between my in-laws and their son, and I am coming in between? Is there anything that I can shift or change? So I think, and a professional counselor, a therapist can help with that. Someone can provides a safe place for us to really explore our own issues, our childhood issues, maybe our spouse's childhood issues, and maybe have a productive professional conversation about the best ways to handle this kind of situations.
Now, Rabab, I'm just curious, right? So say, for example, my spouse and I elected to go to, couples counseling. Like what, just paint a picture. Like, what does that actually look like? Are we sitting on a couch? Are we, and like how often, like, look, what does it actually look like? And what do you actually do in couples counseling?
So couple counseling sometimes, oh, by the way, sometimes only one of the spouses come.
Oh, really?
If the other one does not, usually there is a notion, oh, both people have to come. Of course, it's ideal if both people will come, but sometimes the spouse doesn't want to come. However, it can be effective if you see one of the spouses, because you have a system. If you change only one part of it, that will have a domino effect on the rest of the system. You know what I mean? So that will create some change. The way you not react to things can really change the whole dynamic. When I see couples, I try to listen. So in the beginning, I listen to both of them. And sometimes I would try to maybe meet with each one separately for a couple of sessions to understand their background, try to see what are the issues, and then work on, first of all, getting them on the same page. I'm talking strictly now in relation to in-laws. So identify the issues and see if they agree on it. If they don't, then we want to actually first work on their relationship and see how can we get them to see eye to eye what's going on and understand what's going on, and maybe talk about your own feelings and the I statements more than really attacking the other person and accusing them of not being supportive. Being in tune with yourself, with your own feelings, and actually expressing what's going on from your perspective and how that impacting you and the relationship from your own point of view. Listening to each other without jumping to give your own opinion. Listen, to understand. Put yourself in the other person's shoes, truly, and see what would you do if you are in that situation. Can I like work with a couple that they can be vulnerable with each other, trusting, able to express themselves, understand their frustration, and really be supportive. Sometimes, in some cases, we cannot change what's bothering us, specifically when it comes maybe to in-laws. But if you have a supportive spouse, it will be much easier. If you have someone that validates your feelings, and tells you, I really understand your pain. I can change this and this, but I really, really cannot change that. I hope you understand. But I am here with you. I care about you. I care about how you feel. Imagine this conversation versus screaming and shouting and feeling that you are not validated. This is the pain here is double. The sense of isolation and aloneness in this. I am alone. No one hears me or validates me. That's more painful. So actually getting the spouses to feel each other, to understand what's going on, and to support each other is actually, and to focus on the relationship, to focus that they are one unit. Whatever happens, we are together against the issue. We are not against each other.
Mm. I really appreciate that, Sister Rabab. And even hearing you talk about so many of these elements, whether that is feeling safe to share our feelings, feeling like we are validated and supported, feeling like we're able to listen and genuinely listen. I think these are so many of the hallmarks of, inshallah, producing a successful relationship with our spouse, and not just with our spouse, really with everyone in our lives. And I hope and I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the ability to establish these relationships and to, in fact, make our relationships even better than they are now. And especially for those that are going through challenges, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps them. Sister Rabab, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing the eloquent feedback on, I think, an issue that many of our community members have experience with. And I'm hopeful that some of the advice that you shared serves as a guiding light for them. For those that are in the Pennsylvania and New Jersey area, I want you to know that Sister Rabab is available. Her website is Rabab Alma, RABAB, Alma, ALMA.com. And it's a wonderful website with all sorts of resources as well as contact information if you would like to continue the conversation with Sister Rabab at another point in time.